Views and opinions expressed within the following program are solely those of the individual. These views and opinions do not necessarily represent those of Shaw TV.
Hey Calgary, I'm Kevin Chorney. Today is Thursday, March 7th, and this is Calgary Now. There have been documentaries covering the subject matter and Facebook posts warning us of the dangers of genetically modified organisms, also known as GMOs. But what are they? While the memes on the internet would have us thinking that GMOs are new and artificial products created in labs, many crops have been genetically modified for centuries through breeding as improvements to resist drought and crop-killing bugs. However, as technology and science progresses, the innovative ways to genetically modify crops are becoming more important as the rules and regulations governing our food need to change. As the line blurs between what is food as we commonly perceive it to be grown in nature and what is created by picking and choosing the most desirable traits in a lab, citizens around the world are struggling to separate fact from myth and searching for transparency regarding the source of our food. Would it surprise you to learn that most of the food on grocery store shelves contains genetically modified ingredients? Well, it does. Processed soy and corn, for example, are ingredients found in a plethora of foods we eat. And around 70% of corn and roughly 90% of soybeans utilized in North America are GMO. If you're asking yourself why that is, well, the simple answer, as per usual, it's money. GMO crops can be engineered with a resiliency to cold weather, to ward off pests, and to reduce the need for herbicides. This all amounts to a bigger yield and more bang for your buck. On the surface, GMOs sound like an example of real human achievement. However, health concerns and the questionable ethics of GMO seed producers has polarized opinions on GMOs. We're looking to chop through the hyperbole tonight and gain some clarity on the subject as my guests and I sit down for a discussion in just a moment here. As always, we welcome your comments. Give us a buzz at 403-539-6710 or shoot us a tweet at Calgary Now Show. Stay with us.
That sounds awful, but a lot better than last week.
We weren't born.
Welcome back to the show. Tonight we have Dr. Cami Ryan, a researcher with the College of Agriculture and Bioresources at the University of Saskatchewan, and Brent Books, owner of People Food. Thank you both very much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yes,
rock and roll.
Very much.
I want to start with you, Cami. Dr. Ryan, you prefer Cami?
Cami's good. Thanks very much.
Can I get you to quickly define what is a GMO and why were GMOs developed to begin with?
Well, the term GMO is really turned into a little bit of a political term, and it's not really called that in the scientific world. So I'm going to come at it from a science perspective. And when scientists talk about it, they don't call them GMOs, or when they talk to each other, they talk about genetic engineering. And basically what it is in agriculture and crop production, it's about going in and precisely targeting genetic sequences within a living plant material and either bringing new sets of genes in that confer different kind of characteristics on that plant, whether it's herbicide tolerance or insect resistance or drought tolerance, that sort of thing. And these plants can then go and grow, and they're more productive out in the field.
Solid answer, makes perfect sense. Now, with that in mind, why did GMOs originate to begin with? It seems, well, I guess the straightforward answer would be to feed people that could maybe not otherwise be fed. Is that an accurate description of why we have GMOs to begin with?
Well, I think probably it was so that farmers could be more productive. Yeah. I mean, Canada has a huge part of its economy is agriculture. Like in 2010, I think almost 10% of the GDP wrapped around the agricultural industry. So obviously, having higher productivity levels makes the country more competitive on a global level. So that probably was the driving factor behind it. So agrochemical companies move towards developing these kinds of crops because they are more productive, they're more environmentally friendly, they're just as safe, they've been tested, and they're heavily regulated.
So which food groups then, or what foods in particular on grocery store shelves, the average grocery store, can people expect to find genetically engineered materials in?
Well, I think I saw some numbers about if you just walk into your grocery store, maybe as much as 70% of the items on the shelves have some form of genetically modified organisms in them. Mm-hmm. But sugar beets, like corn, makes up a huge amount of product additives in all of our foods. So you just have to look at the label, and you can pretty much see if there's sugar beets in it, or corn, or soybean, then there's likely to be genetically.
Products,
it's a lot of product. They're foundational elements of lots of food products, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Some things that maybe people wouldn't even realize. Like, I think it is
Probably
important.
not, yeah.
What are some of those products you think, Brent, that people wouldn't realize that these GMO materials are in?
I would believe I feel it's anything processed. You know, if it comes in a package, in my opinion, it's probably been tainted. If you're processing any food to turn into more food of some kind, I think there's something involved. We just try to stay away from kind of a package type food. But
Right. Tell me a bit about the store, about People Food.
well, we started off, the modeling career didn't work out, which was tough. And my wife Linda and I, we were going to open up a store and make fresh food, if you will. And a couple months before we opened, from just being consistently sick for years and years, we figured out that it was celiac disease. So we couldn't make what we thought we were going to make. And then when we sort of saw what was out there several years back, there wasn't much, if you will. And we just thought, you know, there's a need to make a food, if you will. We didn't want to make sort of buns or breads and things. We just kind of want to make more food, if you will, just food. So that's what we shot for, and here we are. Yep.
So, in your opinion, then, are GMOs? Is it a safe product to be consuming?
Well, I don't know. I can just go from what I know, like what I feel when I eat food. You know, I know I have celiac disease. I know if I eat anything that's sort of tampered with, tainted, processed, I get quite sick. I find if I eat anything processed, that's what happens to me. So I kind of tend to stay away from anything that's really genetically modified for the most part, which is your corn, your soy, and that kind of stuff. So we've kind of really eliminated that from our diet, and it's felt great. You know, like I've lost weight. Everything that you hear that could happen happened. Yeah. So
hard to argue that. So then, Cami, I'm sure you've heard. Do you consider it hype? Are GMOs safe? I guess I'll ask you the same question.
Well, there is a mountain of evidence that shows that these all genetically modified organisms are as safe as any other foods that are out there. There is nothing that says otherwise. The correlation, depending on what it is, I would doubt that it's the GMO. I think there's something else in processing that could possibly affect things, plus the gluten, potentially. We were talking about this earlier because my daughter's also gluten intolerant. And but there's mountains of evidence that asserts that all of these genetically modified organisms are very safe. They pass through. It's the most tested product that has been ever entered our food market ever in the history of food making.
Hope so.
Absolutely.
You know, because it does contribute to so much of the food that we do eat. Now,
but there's lots of hype out there.
That's just it. That's the thing that's why we're doing the show, frankly, because you're trying to do research. In my preparation for the show, of course, I do a lot of internet research, and you can't not get a straight answer. You know, Googling the question, "Are GMOs safe?" I'm still on the fence. I mean, there's that much effort being put on both sides of the fence. Why is that? Clearly, Sorry, go ahead.
Well, there's always these sources too, and what I always find that the hype around GMOs, when you go and search on Google, all the hype comes to the top, because the interest groups that are behind the hype, they have a vested interest in pushing that message forward. And I think what happens for scientists, that, you know, I would argue that probably scientists aren't as good in communicating what they do every day, because I don't know any scientist that would sit back and say, no, you know, these things are fine. They've gone through the testing process, the regulatory process. Once they're on the market, they have been thoroughly tested, more tested than anything else that's out there. So in their opinion, there's nothing wrong, and they don't understand what all the hype is about around genetically modified organisms, because in their opinion, and I can see this position, is that it's done more precisely in the lab, whereas before, leading up to the development of genetically modified foods in the 1990s, everything was done really imprecisely. It was done through conventional breeding processes that aren't near as precise as what can be done in the lab. So, I mean, but the thing is that right now, genetically modified crops are growing on about 170 million acres all over the world, and over half of those countries that are growing them are actually emerging economies, and they're starting to really develop around that, and they're seeing that the productivity's there. And like in India, they use 50% less pesticides than they ever did a long time ago. So it's safer for them to use these products. So yeah, they're safe.
Brent, the company, Monsanto, what connotation does that conjure to you immediately?
I'm not a fan. They're a chemical company initially, and I don't know. Like I look at it like soy and corn, although they produce a lot of things to process to make foods with. It's to me, it's not food. I don't know. Like row farming is a strange thing. It's a strange thing to see, like so much soy, so much corn, and so much being worked into that. When I would rather there'd be more diversity in farming with the pigs, chickens.
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, a lot of people complain about companies, big seed producers, saying that that's exactly what they're doing. They're limiting the biodiversity that's available in these nations, especially developing nations, and that there is some real consequences to that. In your research, where does this fit in, or does it at all?
Well, I mean, obviously, when the genetically modified crop varieties are developed by the big 5 or 6 companies in the world, again, there's a huge, not only against GMOs, but against the big corporation, because there's always kind of an anti-corporate sentiment that kind of pushes these things along. But arguably, they're also bringing some great products to the market that will help third world and developing and emerging markets and the farmers in those fields to be able to produce more. I think almost what GMOs bring to the world is quality of life. I mean, farmers can now grow more on less land. They can do it in a more environmentally friendly manner, because these herbicides that they use now are less pervasive in the soil. There's less runoff into water tables. So, I mean, the benefits, if we could transfer this to the third world, and I think that those things are being developed, then we can offer up that same technology, that same opportunity for other growers in the world.
Okay, then I got to ask, why is it that some of these, Peru, for example, Peru has essentially banned GMO production in their country, as well as Hungary. These are developed nations who decided, there's a risk with GMOs, so much so that we are going to ban them from being produced and consumed by our citizens. Now, is this a misguided perception that they're unhealthy? Is this economics, or is this ethics?
I think a lot of it comes from interest groups. Interest groups all over the world and they're very globalized interest groups, and they have an interest in absolutely pushing GMOs completely out of the market, not just trying to create a balance or allowing for options for all farmers, because farmers should have options on how they want to produce food, but they have an agenda behind it, and largely it's anti-corporate. So they put a lot of pressure on governments to kind of shift the opinion. So that's a lot of things, and it's not just. I don't know about Peru. Actually, I've not heard that one, so I can't speak to that. But there are a lot of countries, especially European countries, that actually are pretty much. There's a lot of GM-free zones there.
Yeah, it does.
It's
fairly prevalent in Europe. Well, Peru's
right.
a 10-year ban, is my understanding.
Yeah. But here's a myth for you. Here's a story for you. Back in 2002, Zambia was in the middle of its most severe famine. And there were interest groups out of the European Union that forced the president at that time and told him, he said, any of this food aid coming out of the United States actually is poison. And so he locked it up. He locked all the foodstuffs off. It was corn, and he wouldn't let his people eat it because he said he'd rather have them starve than to eat this poison from the U.S. I mean, this is the problem with all of this. This is safe food. This was brought into this country to save these people, and that's what happens. It's unfortunate, and this is all coming from interest groups.
It's fascinating is what it is. Folks, we're going to take a quick break, check out what our rant pad has to say on the issue. Stay with us.
I actually believe that GMOs could be a potentially good thing. It's how the GMOs are presented and made, so to speak. I don't agree with a lot of the plant-based GMOs and copywriting seeds that can't reproduce themselves. So farmers that are next to other farmers that actually have GMO seeds that are copyrighted by Monsanto, that seeds accidentally blow on their farm, they get arrested, they get stuff taken away from them. However, certain things like growing animal protein or even cloning the perfect cow, like the Belgian double blue cow that has double muscle built on it, I don't have a problem with that at all. If you can have a cow or a pig or a sheep or a goat or whatever that has the same amount of, availability to the public and, half the amount of space, that's perfectly fine by me. I think that it actually could solve a lot of the world food problems. It all just needs to be researched by responsible government organizations to make sure it's good for their own people.
Tonight we're talking genetically modified organisms. Don't forget to shoot us a tweet, or if you want, give us a call and join the discussion. So I got to ask you, Brent, what do you think? What do you think? What Dr. Ryan, Cami had just explained is that, well, essentially, it's a lot of special interest that's involved in pulling these GMOs from countries. Do you buy it? Tough question, I guess.
It's tricky. I think you can certainly see what they do for countries, the growth, the economics, what they bring in, the cheaper cost, the less work, more land. It's kind of a win-win.
It is, though, isn't it? I mean, people are being fed. Isn't that the bottom line? Shouldn't that be the end goal of these seed producers, is to ensure that people are fed? See, I was reading...
And the other thing
go
is,
ahead.
too, is we can't use up any more land.
Yeah,
we have to
very
produce for the people on the land base that we have available to us. We can't expand that.
No, that's very true. So in Canada, then, what regulations are available to us that protect us or help us along with the GMOs?
Well, the process here is regulated through Health Canada, Environment Canada, and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and they work together. And when industry brings something to the market, and actually it takes about $140 million and on average 13 years to bring just one genetically modified crop through through research to regulatory systems. So it's really extensive and it's very expensive. So
that would make it legal to sell in Canada, or is that the development from companies like Monsanto?
yeah, that's the development process to go and bring it into the market. And they have to go and they're regulated in the U.S. They're going to grow in the U.S. They have to be regulated there. So they go they navigate these processes throughout. And then they have field trials and they have to follow good laboratory practices, stewardship programs, and so on. And the industry itself, like Monsanto and the other companies, they're responsible for actually paying for all of the testing and trials, and they don't pay for the approvals, but they have to cover the cost of all the trials and tests. And if it doesn't get approved, they eat those costs, and that's kind of the way it is. So it's a very expensive and time-consuming process.
So is Canada different than many other developed nations as far as our regulations?
No, you know what? I think our regulations, like North American regulations, are very similar. The European Union is ours is a product trigger. So if something is developed conventionally for growing in Canada, it will be a product trait trigger that will be the deciding factor. But if you go over to the European Union, it's about the process. That's why they're very particular, and that's why their regulatory system's wrapped around more socioeconomic factors in terms of how they regulate things.
Process.
Yeah. Process, meaning it was done with genetic engineering versus conventional plant breeding.
So Brent, with the product that you're supplying to people, do you think you have more customers nowadays because, well, I understand it's gluten-free. You guys have a gluten-free product, which, most of the time is also a GMO-free product as well.
Yep.
Are people now purchasing those products, in your estimation, because of ethics? Are they worried about their health?
I think it's a whole whack of things. I think as people, when it's all said and done, nothing's going to change in a human, I think, until they get sick or, they have to change, and then it's a family-related thing, and then it kind of goes along. I think, in a way, if you look at food and what you're eating daily, of what's been out there, what's been offered, at some point in time, you should kind of sit back and look. For myself, I got ill, and I also had a child, and these were two things where once you feed a child what's out there, it kind of makes you think, what am I feeding my child? So we looked at it more like there should be a better food out there, I guess. And
should be an option available for people.
Yeah, that's all. And because it's, the food companies, they're pretty big. They control, I think, a fair bit.
Well, hey, it's absolutely. I mean, Monsanto and what's the other one? Is it? The name escapes me. There's essentially three of these big seed producers that apparently account for 50% of the global seed production. I mean, that's essentially a monopoly, is it not? I mean, it's spooky words being used there. 50% global.
Well, yeah, but what we're forgetting, and what we talked about before, was these are the seed companies, and then there's people like you that have your company, but in between you have these other food companies like Kraft and so forth, and there's been a whole bunch of consolidation within those companies as well. So I mean, it's not just Monsanto and you. It's like there's in between as well. So,
So have you found that moving forward, with your business, production's up, business is up.
It's been a
So
struggle.
people are kind of,
But it's starting to pick up a fair bit. I don't, what started off as a fad, and I think it's hard to eat gluten-free food, proper gluten-free food, if you will, and not lose weight. I think if you can remove any kind of a processed food out of your plate, it's going to help out. And I think that just sort of begins the trend. I think because of that, it just starts people eating and looking at food differently. Fast food, processed food,
that seems fair.
Just a note too is that there's no genetically modified wheat
There's no
produced.
genetically
No,
modified wheat.
no. So the gluten, of course, is an issue, especially with celiac and with like my daughter who has a gluten intolerance. So that's a huge thing. But I always like to say this is that we eat genetically modified food. We're okay with it. We have no problems with it, and I'd have no problem feeding my kids or my grandkids, anybody.
Do you think that was surprise maybe some of your customers that there is no genetically, modified wheat? That's news to me. I did not know that.
No, like I think I think wheat's changed from what it initially was to what it's produced to now. But I just believe at the end of the day, the flour that's made from wheat, that's in everything, and I think that's the key lying cause. It's just cheap to put flour in things, so it's probably not genetically modified, but it's in everything, and it's not necessarily I don't think a super decent food. Processed white unbleached flour. It's in a lot of things. I mean, it's in any sauces and.
Yeah, basically.
Well, we should eat well. We were talking about this before as well. We said we should eat like our grandmother and our
Yeah,
mothers
absolutely.
told us is
Yeah.
just eat all your fruits and vegetables, and we're very lucky. I mean, and we have to admit this too, is that we live in a first world, where sometimes I would argue that sometimes we have an aesthetic relationship with food, and we also can have a dietetically dangerous relationship with food. But it seems like the privilege that we live in affords us that. But we also have a great variety of food.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember being a little kid and having to be able, even the fruit we had, we only could eat certain fruits, but now we have more of a variety. We've got global trade. We get access to so much more interesting food than we ever did. And I think that we can't forget how good we do eat.
It's very true. It's very true. I mean, there's places in the world where kids are dying. Apparently, in some parts of the world, well, I guess it's globally, 670,000 children are dying due to a lack of vitamin A. Now to me, that's ridiculous. That should not be happening because they're eating their main staple is white rice. And then you have the development of golden rice. I'm sure you can probably comment on the golden rice, which I'd like to touch on briefly here. Apparently, golden rice has 23 times the level of beta-carotene as does white rice, which amounts to vast higher amounts of vitamin A, which could save lives. And yet, because, again, back to the hype that's involved, these kids aren't getting this product because countries won't sign up to allow it to be used because of fear of, other health potential issues.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. But golden rice too, I think we can see it on the horizon. It'll probably be growing officially in the Philippines, but probably not for another 2 years because there's delays in that regulatory process right now. But it shows a lot of promise. And I think that it's almost unethical if we have this technology and we're able to develop these kinds of products that we don't provide them. And we don't provide farmers with options to grow them, and we don't provide people who need the food to eat them. So,
would you agree, Brent? I mean, it's hard not to.
Yeah, it's the truth. If you can grow it, you can make it, you can feed people. It's tricky.
Of course, on the flip side of the coin, should seeds be able to be patented? I mean, are seeds not life-giving? I mean, we can't patent water. Should we be patented seeds? I mean, there's a bit of an ethical debate there. What are your thoughts on that?
I think if you can control the patents to all the seeds, you own the world, realistically. I mean, that's a big thing to be in charge of.
Something tells me you're not going to agree.
well, I mean, that's a complex question because, I think most people, when you put the argument forward like that, you struggle with it. But the realities of the patent system is that what happens is you're not going to get part of the innovation process and bringing something to the market, whether it's a new kind of a chair or a new structure or a new invention, is that the person that develops that invention needs to protect it for a certain amount of time so that they can get a return on their investment. Otherwise, no one would develop
And
anything.
you mentioned $140 million.
Yeah, and
That's a
it's
lot of money.
huge. So there has to be a certain amount of protection that goes with that. So I am of the mind that the patenting process needs to be protected, or there needs to be intellectual property, and not only this is not only companies that protect their property. It's also the private sector that has to with plant variety protection. They have their own sets of intellectual property because they have to also protect their inventions as well. So it's part of the process. I think it's. I mean, unless we go in and we can fundamentally change how we protect and how we can incite innovation, this is what our options are right now.
Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22, I suppose. Folks, our half hour is almost up. After this break, we're going to wrap up and ask a random question. Stay with us.
Well, I mean, it's kind of hard to say because some sources I've heard that it's a good thing and it's positive and it's going to do more good than harm, and then other sources you hear that it's a negative thing and that it's devastating for people's health and all kinds of things. I think the truth lies probably somewhere in the middle. It obviously has, genetically modified organism has its positive purposes. It can potentially bulk up the nutrients in a specific food, whatever the case may be, make it more resistant, make crops more resistant rather, when it comes to pesticides and that kind of thing, which is good for farmers and it's good in some senses, but we were having a discussion before about how that throws off the natural cycle of things because it's killing insects left, right, and center, which we obviously need for the ecosystem and the natural order, and you're injecting hormones and who knows what kind of things into people. So it's good and bad. I can't really weigh in on either or too much, but yeah.
Welcome back. I'm going to let you quickly respond to Justine, if you would.
Oh, no, actually, it's quite lots of enthusiasm there. It's not killing insects left, right, and center, just so you know. Part of that has been a lot of the hype behind genetically modified organisms is that there's been a couple of studies that have come out over the past, and monarch butterflies was one of them. Anyway, they've ended up after a review of the science and a replication of the scientific protocols and an assessment that that's not the case at all. Not killing the bugs.
Okay, we're going to jump right into our random question. The way this works, I honestly have no idea what's on these pieces of paper.
I believe you.
I'll let you do the honors, Brent. Just hand it back to me. I'm going to read it, and we can all weigh in.
All right.
Again, they have nothing to do with the discussion, so don't hold me accountable for what's on here, will you? What was your highest cell phone bill roaming charges? So you go away on vacation, roaming charges, the bill comes in the mail, and you throw it through the window. I think we've all been there. Are you serious? Are you serious?
Yeah, it was a really big mistake.
Really?
Yeah.
How'd that happen?
My father just had a stroke at this time of my life, and I had to go to New Orleans for a job, and he likes his blues music, and there was this gentleman who was a street performer who was phenomenally great, and he was singing along, so I phoned and I played his whole little
Sure.
part.
Yeah.
I always thought it'd be nice to go to New Orleans with my dad and stuff, so I did that and got home and saw the bill, and I made a mistake, but it was a nice gesture for my dad.
Yeah, definitely that is. That's really sweet of you, matter of fact. How about yourself,
That's a good
Cammie?
story.
Isn't that a good story?
That's a good story.
That is
I
a
don't
good
even
story.
can't compete with that. But actually, we had a death in the family, and when things come on suddenly and you start traveling around, and then
Yeah.
you ended up getting a bill. And I think my bill at that point was maybe around $200. But the company was really great. I phoned them up, and they cut it down
You'd
by
hope
half.
they'd give you a break, though.
They did.
They did?
They did. It was really good.
Did they give you a break?
Really?
No, it was because he was alive and fine at this time. It was like the 8 months after. And
That's
yeah,
terrible.
I would have pulled a George Costanza. It wouldn't have looked good. I went that way. And
Wow. My girlfriend's daughter had a $1,250 cell phone bill, if you can believe it. Yeah. I won't get into it. She's probably talking about it right now. Yeah, and you know what? She still has a phone. Figure that
she
one out.
wins.
Folks, that's all the time we have. Thanks very much for joining us. Hopefully we shed some light on what is indeed a very important issue. You can keep the conversation going on Facebook or Twitter. Of course, if you have a topic you want us to discuss, by all means, let us know. Drop us a line. Take care.